In today's photography review show, we're gonna review images from 26 photographers. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of our photography review show. For those who don't know me, my name is Jakub and I'm a professional photographer based in West Sussex, England. Now, for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been reviewing photos for my colleagues and friends, and this is the reason why we decided that we're gonna introduce the same for our photography community here at Clever Photographer. Now, we've been thrilled by the interest, and this is the reason why we had to limit a little bit the entries to 1 or 2 photos per photographer, and the same reason why we also take this show and divide it between the 3 parts. First one, we usually look at the landscape photographers. Second one, we look at the mixed theme photographers, and then the last part, we usually look at the other parts and other themes that we receive. So, things like portrait photographers, travel photographers, wildlife photographers, and so on. Now, before we want to move on, we want to remind you about 2 things. First is our new Facebook group called Clever Photographer Academy. It's a group where we talk all things photography, we review your photos throughout the week, we do regular photography competition, we answer your questions when it comes to photography, and we have a lots of fun there. So make sure you head to the Facebook and join us at Clever Photographer Academy. The second thing we want to ask you is to make sure that you like, comment on this video, and that you follow us so we can create more of the content like this. But now we don't want to hold you any further, so let's jump straight into the reviewing. And here we are back in the Lightroom where we're going to be reviewing our landscape photographers. So yes, in this first part of our photography review show, we're going to be focusing on landscape photographers. Today we have 12 of them, so we have a lot to go through, so let's jump straight into it. Starting with Alan, we have 2 pictures from him right here. Beautiful 2 images, so let's start right there. First impression, I really like them, I really like what you've done here. Love the long exposure here, love the colors. For everybody who know me, I am a big fan of dramatic saturated landscape photography, and this is definitely a great example of it. And then here again, very nice as well. Interesting white balance, everything is nice and sharp, and a lovely sky again, so well done there, Alan. So let's talk about it. Let's jump into it. So starting here, talking about the technical part of your photos, I like how everything is sharp all the way through the forest at the back, and then I really like the long exposure used on the actual river. Let's look and see if we have any details, and we have. So obviously using your Nikon 16 to 35 lens f4, your ISO was on 64, which is the good choice right there. 24 millimeters f14. I would be quite interested why you went for the f14, maybe trying to make sure that you have everything sharp, and also really pushing down your shutter speed. So I'm assuming maybe you didn't have an ND filter with you, but either way, it really works. I like how you done the long exposure, so there is still a little bit of texture on it. However, it's nice and smooth there. 1 second, yeah, this is what it creates. Obviously, anytime it comes to long exposure in a landscape photography, what you want to have the movement with the long exposure, and you want to have the sharpness in that kind of main holding points, like your rocks and stones and trees, and that's really nicely done here. Looking around, looking at the sharpness of your trees, either it was super calm and you had no wind at all, or you done multiple exposures, which really works here as well. Well done on that, Alan. I think technically this is very well captured. I like the diffused light, and everything is in order for me here. Looking at this one again, we're talking about the sharpness all the way through. Looking at the details, you were ISO 100. Perfect there. f11, I can see that you're going more for the kind of higher f-stops. You were using 24 to 70 lens, which I'm sure is great. Let's have a look a little bit closer. The sky, I'm not 100% sure about the sky if it was here like this, because I can see some artifacts around the trees, but either way it really fits the scene. Again, really nice diffused light and quite interesting kind of color mix on the greens, bringing more the kind of pastel green colors out. I think it really works very well. So technically this one is good. Again, I really like the kind of waterfall here. Obviously with the speed you probably didn't need to use long exposure here, and and even if you did, it really works here. So very, very well done. The composition wise, I think this works really nice. I think it takes the river in the center, it creates really nice leading line into the kind of valley, and it works very well. I like that there is a little bit of the sky, but not too much, and the tree in overall, I think it really works. Obviously there is this foreground element which adds a little bit of depth of the field, but it's not too overwhelming. I like the fact that it has the same color as the rest of the image, so it's not too distracting as sometimes these big rocks and these subjects can be. So in overall, this is great. I really like the cropping. I think I really like how it kind of takes you through the golden points on the rule of thirds. So well done on this one, Alan. And on this one, again, when it comes to composition, I think it's well done. I think it's very interesting crop. Everything is there, a little bit of the sky, you know, the waterfall almost on your thirds. Again, there is the third of the green. Just well done. Post-processing wise, just keep an eye on the saturation. I think you slightly touching the saturation on being too much, but that's about it. I think otherwise it really works. What I would do, maybe add a little bit heavier vignette to kind of really bring the attention towards the valley. Again, you could also add a little bit of masking by using maybe like a linear gradient and bringing down the attention away from the top of the picture and really focusing on the center of the image. That's about it. I think it's really cool. I really like what you've done here. Again, I would just repeat myself. Similarly, you could just maybe see if a little bit of vignette would help here, and maybe do a little bit of more dodge and burn, but that's about it. Alan, I don't have much to say. I think your pictures are great. As always, if you have a time, make sure you join us on our Facebook group, Clever Photographer Academy. We're looking for new photographers. We talk all things photography, and we are sure that you would fit there with us. Anyway, if not, make sure you send us more pictures in the future. We would love to see them. Moving on to the next photographer, we're talking about Bernard. Bernard, you sent us 2 photos, one black and white and one picture in this kind of white frame. Again, just as a reminder for all of you folks, make sure that you don't use any frames, names and watermarks when you send the pictures for your reviews. This goes not just for us, but any professional review. If you submit your photos, most places will actually reject them, and the reason is simple. All you want from the person who is reviewing your photos is to focus on your image, on the actual artwork. You don't want any attention away going by your watermark or signatures, fonts, white or any color frames. It's just a shame to lose the attention or the possibility to get your photos reviews. I will review it for you, but just for the future, make sure that you try to stay away from it. Similarly with the white frames, just as a reminder, human eyes naturally going for the brightest and whitest part of the photo first, and when you put a white frame, that's where your eyes goes. They get really easily confused, and it just takes away the magic of your photos. So for the future, Bernard. Anyway, now we are here talking about your photos. So we have this black and white photography, really kind of drama, grungy capture. I quite like the photo, to be honest. I think it's tilting just a touch, but in general, I think it works very well. I see there is a lot of noise, and I wonder if you added like a grain in the post-processing, we can have a look if we have any information. And looking at your ISO being 200, I can't imagine that there would be that much grain coming from. So maybe you add it afterwards to make the kind of look. And in overall, I actually really like this photo. Moving on the photo right here, let's try to see if we can actually crop the white frame so we can really focus just on the image itself. So we'll do this, this, and this. And let's talk about it. So, not the most interesting scene on the world. I quite like what you've done with the pole, and I really like the kind of this cloudy kind of thing in the sky. It's quite nice, but compared to the two, I think composition and technical, this one is on another level, Bernard. This one is still quite nice. You're getting some kind of blue league here, and you're really low. I think there is like a 1 yard here. I think it would be so much cooler if you would go closer to the 1 yard and maybe see if you can get more kind of significant foreground element other than the pole. You see, if you would go a little bit higher and closer, you would get more to fill in. The sky isn't interesting enough to be the subject by itself. So I think this one would need a little bit more work. Talking about technical point of view, so technically, let's have a look at the information. You use your Nikon 18 to 55. You were 18 millimeters, so really wide. Your ISO was on 200. As always, just a reminder, try to stay on 100 as much as you can. You will avoid any digital noise and it will really help your pictures. Even more so looking at the shutter speed, 1/2500th of a second. That's super fast and you don't really need it for a scene like this. So just something to think of for the future. So if you would lower the shutter speed, you could bring the ISO down and your picture would lose completely the digital noise. In overall, technically, the trees are sharp, so that works. I like how you're a little bit higher. I think the light is quite interesting. The sky is very dramatic. There is lots of textures in it, so it's well captured. So well done on this one. If I have to talk about composition, I really like it. I think you really use the rule of third here very well. If there would be just the two trees, maybe it would be a little bit emptier, but this really works. Also, the way the trees are positioned, it creates really nice depth of field, so I quite like it. I quite like how the tree is quite significant and then it kind of goes down. So in overall, I really like the composition. I think it's a very interesting picture. I like how there is a little bit of foreground with the grass in front and then obviously the fields at the back. It's very interesting. On this one, when we talk about the technical point of view, obviously everything in foreground is sharp. You're getting super blue sky, so that I think is a little bit of a shame. It would be nicer if there would be a little bit more texture in it. And again, I think it would be better if you would get closer. But technically, there is nothing really much wrong other than the time of the day. Everything is sharp. Everything is exposed well. It's just the composition itself. And the composition I already talked to. I know the pole is maybe interesting, but I think it would get so much more interesting if you would get closer to the actual 1 yard or whatever it is, and you could get more out of this scene. Post-processing, this is very well done. If the grain was on purpose, it quite work. It's quite natural, black and white. I can see a little bit of kind of parts here which are not exactly matching, just something to keep an eye. You're also getting glow behind the trees, so either if you've done a sky replacement or if you pushed your highlights, keep an eye on those. On this one, post-processing, as I say, you're getting blue leak here, so it looks like maybe there is a little bit of a sky replacement happening or heavy blue gradient use. And also keep an eye on your kind of blur and the white balance, which have to match with the sky in the foreground. I think another tip for next time, Bernard, make sure that you send us the picture in the best quality possible, because as you can see, if I really kind of zoom in and try to look for some kind of details, everything becomes blurry, and that's a shame. Anyway, Bernard, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to join us at our Clever Photographer Academy on Facebook. It's a Facebook group for photographers just like you and me, and we have lots of fun there. We review photos throughout the week, do photography competitions, and have lots of fun there. So I hope to see you there. Anyway, moving next, we have a Chris. Chris, we have a photo for you right here. Big panorama with lots of texture happening. It's an interesting capture, Chris. I wonder if those are like cactuses or whatever it is. Obviously, this is kind of selective color edit, which I'm personally a big fan of. I know lots of photographers lately are really slaying this photo editing because they think it's very outdated. But personally, I like it when it works. From my first impression, one thing I would add to it, I think in order to work, you really want to push your contrast and make it a little bit more contrasty and bring the darkness really out, because other than the green, it looks very, very flat, including your sky. So that would be my one and first kind of note for you. Moving on the technical part, so everything is sharp in foreground. Let's have a look if we have any information of your camera. You were using Fujifilm. Your ISO 200, again, just a reminder, lower the ISO, less the noise. You don't want to introduce any extra noise than you have to, although you are on 1/60th of the second. So I wonder what was exactly the idea. F16, do you have to have the f-stop so high? Because obviously even if with f11 you still get the sharpness all the way, so maybe just something to keep an eye on. When it comes to the composition, I think it's quite nicely done. I don't know if you need the whole lot of a sky there. I think if you would have pushed it a little bit lower, maybe to something like this. I think it would still work. Again, just as a reminder, if certain parts of your photo don't add anything to the composition and storytelling, they just don't really need to be there. I think by doing this cropping, you also following the rule of third, quite often used in landscape photography in a picture like this, where you're keeping 2/3 of your ground and 1/3 of the sky, or the other way around, 2/3 of the sky if the sky is your main subject and 1/3 of the ground. And I think it just makes it a little bit more balanced and more pleasing on the eye. But anyway, the way you crop it, the way you crop it. I think composition is quite interesting. The cactuses works together with the background as a mountain and the sky. I think it's quite interesting, Chris. Talking about post-processing, so I showed you already what I would do with the cropping. Definitely, I would push the contrast to get more on the foreground and to get more out of the sky. I think it also missing a little linear gradient to close the picture from the top and bring a bit more texture in the sky itself. So maybe something like this would help, as well as another one with the brush and maybe add more, even more contrast to the actual mountains. Would work as well. When it comes to the selective color, make sure you keep an eye even on the parts like this. So I think it really works on the cactuses, but you want to make sure that you don't get any of the green leaks into these areas, and it can be really easily removed by just using brush mask and just brushing and removing the saturation. You can really help to this effect. Let's see if we can just push the flow. And it takes a little bit of extra time, but you can really push this effect and make sure that it's done correctly. So that way you have really green just on your flowers and cactuses and not on the ground. Anyway, Chris, I think this is it. I think it's a lovely photo. It's a lovely idea. I would love to be there. Also, I would love to see the original. It would be interesting to see how it look to start with. But either way, Chris, make sure you send us more photos in the future. We would love to see them. Until then, take care. Next, we have Doug. Doug, we have your photo from the Isle of Skye again. So this is the final edit, and this is the original image. So let's have a look on it. Obviously, I have a very soft spot for the Isle of Skye. And in fact, I actually reviewed this already in a group, but we're just going to quickly visit it. Talking about the ferry pools right here. So let's talk about the first impression. I love the photo. I love what you done with the rock. I really like the fact that you got a little bit higher, so you see the pool still in the kind of middle ground here with the waterfalls. I love how you handle the sharpness on the stones and the long exposure. The long exposure isn't too long, so you still get some kind of texture rather than these white streaks all the way through. Let's have a look at your settings. So this was 1/3 of a second. If I'm right, yeah. F20, 26 millimeters, ISO 100. Excellent, excellent. I really like the edit in general. Again, I think it really works in a stages. You get your foreground with the stones and kind of not so long exposure, then you get the longer exposure on the middle ground here, and then the rock on the bottom. I think it really works. Again, just as on multiple pictures before, I really like the fact that you have the fog and you coming out with some details out of it. I think quite often recently I see fog being just as this kind of white or even worse dirt blob on a photo, which doesn't really add anything. I think that's really cool. I really like how your rock just kind of standing out, and it's really, really cool. So technically well done. Composition wise, I think it's really nicely done as well. Obviously, as I said in my picture, I think there is a way how you can move a little bit towards the side and maybe get the rock in the middle to kind of really balance the composition towards the center, but it's still very, very nice. I think the off-center works very well here, and I can't really say much wrong about the picture, Doug. I think it's really cool. The post-processing, I like it. I like how you kind of almost monotone the grass, which probably was monotone by then, but I think the scene is quite complicated with obviously lots happening in all the stages, so you don't want to introduce lots of color and lots of elements in the middle of it by adding some saturation to the grass or so on, because then it would just become overwhelming. I think this really works. I think it's a great capture, and well done, Doug. Again, thank you very much for joining us this week. Thank you for joining us on the Facebook group, and it's always a pleasure to have you. Moving on to the next photographer, we have Greg. Greg and the railway photography. Greg, I'm a huge fan of railway photography, and this is the first time I'm getting some photos here, so I'm super excited. So thank you very much for sending us those photos, and let's look at them. So Greg, you sent us 2 photos. First one right here with the train arriving, kind of moody scene with the moody sky, and a lovely photo. And then this one with the warm sunset colors coming from the side, lots of fog. I love both of the photos. If I would have to say, I wish we could maybe remove those poles to take a little bit of the attention away and bring it back to the actual train. On this one, I don't have much to add. I think it's beautiful, beautiful image. So let's talk about the technical part of the photo. So obviously you're getting the fog here. Let's have a look here and here as well, going up, well captured. Let's see if we have details. So this was by drone, DJI, I'm assuming 1/320 of the second, ISO 160. Very, very cool. Technically, yeah, everything is sharp. I think the exposure is done right. I think you captured the fog as well in a nice kind of texture way, so that is always a bonus here. On this one, technically, I think it's well done. I absolutely love the steam and the smoke coming out from the actual train all the way up. I like how it kind of disappears into the sky. I think it's beautiful. The light from the side works really well here. The sharpness is spot on. The exposure is spot on. Everything is excellent when it comes to technical point. Let's see, this was your Nikon ISO 200. Just as always, remember that lower the ISO, better for the picture, so you don't introduce any additional noise to your photos, Greg. Anyway, lovely photo. So let's talk about the composition. I think this one is great. I really like how it kind of arrives into the scene. Obviously you have the full picture, the leading light working here as well. Obviously if you would really want, you would push the train a little bit back. I think it would be even a little bit nicer, but that's more as a tip rather than something wrong with the photo, Greg. The leading light work, I think the sky works there as well, the tree works there as well. It's a lovely capture. Composition wise, I think it's very cool. This one as well, I feel it looked little, for a moment I thought it's tilting, but I don't think it does actually. I think it's the way the train arrives. I think that here the train arriving really well. Again, I just think it's a shame for these foreground elements, but I completely get that it's impossible to remove them and they probably have to be to help. I really like how much of the sky you left, because it really brings the steam and the smoke up, and it's a really important part of the image, and I think it works super well as well. Post-processing wise, this one is a little bit more on the natural side. The white balance, let's just check out what would auto do, and you see it doesn't really change much. It's always a good sign if I try to switch it to auto and it pretty much stays the same. That means that you kind of spot on there. I think your editing is quite nicely done here. I think maybe you could use a little bit of a vignette just to close it a bit more. Even more here from the side, if you would use the masking, maybe a linear gradient, just to kind of keep the attention really towards the train, something like this. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, on this one, I think it's super cool. On this one, I wouldn't add anything neither. And post-processing just those. Let's have a look at the white balance, which is on a kind of yellow pastel side, which I think works quite well too. I think this is better edit. I think there is really nice kind of contrast in the steam and everything. So well done. In overall, Greg, thank you so much for sending us your photos. I hope to see more of them in the future. Just as always, if you have a time, make sure to join us at the Clever Photographer Academy so we can get more inspiration from your train photography. Moving on to the next photographer, Jennifer. Jennifer, we have 2 photos from you. So landscape photos, lots of kind of mountains. So let's have a look at it. Jennifer, first impression, I really like the texture in the sky, although I think both of the pictures are so beautiful. It's almost a shame that you didn't get them during like a sunset, sunrise, or golden hour. I think that would push them even a little bit further, but still very, very nice. I like what you've done here with the foreground with the flowers. This one, it kind of brings you into the valley, which is really nice. I wish you were a little bit more on the side so we can see more, so it would create a little bit bigger depth of the field, but in overall it's a nice photo. So technically I think both of them are cool. Obviously everything is sharp. Let's have a look at the information. You use f13, smart enough, ISO 100, that's the important one, 1/200 of a second, so great as a setting. F13, I mean, for the scene like this, when the flowers are really in front of you and using them as a foreground, I think F13 is a smart choice. You really want to check with your camera what gives you the best sharpness all the way through. On this one, f8, yeah, this makes more sense. Obviously on this picture where the foreground element is further from you and you don't need the high f-stop to keep everything sharp. So a lovely, lovely photo. Again, ISO 100. Technically both of them are very well done. My only suggestion would be to try to go out and shoot at different times, but technically well handled. Composition. So this one I prefer this one when it comes to composition because I think the flowers really work here. I think it really kind of introduce nice entry to the actual photo. I think that I really like the amount of sky you left there. I think it's nice and dramatic. I think it works. Obviously there is nice light throughout the rocks, so it's very interesting. And Jennifer, this is a lovely, lovely image. Even when it comes to post-processing and editing, I wouldn't add much to it. I think it's well handled. It's really contrasty, so just keep an eye on a contrast slider to make sure that it doesn't become too much. But in overall, Jennifer, it's great. So this picture is excellent. Now, when it comes to this and a composition, again, I wish you could have been a little bit more on the side because as the valley is kind of hiding behind, it's losing a little bit of the depth of the field. Now, the stones works as a foreground element, but then you kind of start to lose it because obviously everything is very quickly in front of each other. So that's just one suggestion. Now, post-processing, let's check the white balance. Yeah, maybe a little bit more yellow because when I look at it originally, it has a lots of green tint all the way through. So if we would push the yellow and a tint a little bit, I think that would help. Another thing which could help would be to use a little bit of the vignette to close the actual view. And that's about it. I think it's a lovely, lovely capture, Jennifer. Thank you very much for sending your pictures over. If you have a time, make sure you join us in our new group, Clever Photographer Academy. And if not, make sure you send us more photos so we can review them for you. Moving on the next photographer, we have a John Lister. John, 2 images this week. And once again, I'm very impressed. So let's talk about them. We have this lighthouse right here. So lighthouse, which kind of introduce the whole entry into the image with a little bit of path right here. And then we get the church with a little bit of path right here. Let's talk about them. First impression, I like the lighthouse. I'm a bit confused about why we have just half of the sun. I think that's a little bit of a shame. I think even if you would have to do panorama with 2-3 pictures, I think the whole scene would work a little bit better. But other than that, you're shooting at the right time. I really like the image. On this one, it has a heavy blue tint, this one. And the church is really nice. I just think it's a shame that you don't have more of this kind of entrance. I think for the composition, it would work nicer if you would have a little bit of a path leading towards the church. But that's just for the next time. Talking about technique point on this picture. So everything is sharp all the way through, which is really cool. Your light is stunning. You're shooting at the right time. No noise. So let's have a look at the settings. ISO 560, so let's zoom in. No, either you've done really good post-processing or there is not much noise introduced, so that's very, very good. I'm very happy with that. There is a little bit in the shadows here, but not heavy at all. 24 millimeters, f11, 320th of a second. Well done. I think the setting is great. I think that technically this picture is very well done. This one, I think as well, you get obviously nice sharp building. You get a nice level of details in the foreground as well. I think in overall, very, very cool photo, John. Technically well done. Composition wise, again, I think on this one, it's almost like you have, this happens to me all the time. I have my main subject and then I have the sun, and I'm desperately trying to put them together. And what I end up doing is that I have this main subject far away, and then I have the sun far away. It's just somehow like your picture is missing bit of image on this side, and then it's missing the rest of the sun. This photo form for me is shouting for being in panorama, making sure it's all kind of there. I'm thinking about 2-3 images because your lighthouse is really kind of shifting towards the side and you're missing half of the sun. So that's really my main thing. I don't know if you could have done a little bit more with this path to use it as a foreground element, John, but other than that, it's just something to do. I would kind of walk a little bit further around, look for simple composition elements like your leading line, or get to the position where you can easily frame both of the things together. I think if you would have actually cropped the sun away, so let me show you, if you would have done something like this, let's say this, I would never know the sun is there. The lighthouse is pretty much there altogether, and it would work better. But once you start to cut something like a sun halfway, and then you have this path which is a bit distracting as well, it's just not 100% working. On this one, nothing really wrong. Let's have a look at the geometry if it would help us a little bit. It sorts it just a little bit. What I think is that it's just missing like a foreground element. It's missing something what will introduce us into the scene. The rock is kind of half hidden, so we kind of see it. I think this path could have really helped us because there is not really much here which we would miss by moving a little bit towards side. So just for next time, John. Post-processing, nothing to add to this. I think it's well done. On this one, as I said already, you get this really blue tint. So let's see if we would go to auto and then shift it back to something like this. I think that would really help. And then you would need to do some kind of local adjustments to remove some of the blue tint from the scene. So, John, thank you very much for sending us your photos. Just as always, it's a pleasure to see them, and I hope to see more of them in the future. Until then, take care. Moving on to the next photographer, John Wilson. John, I have actually reviewed your photo last week, or at least this one. Let's have a look. John Wilson right here. So I have reviewed this photo in last week's episode. Make sure you check it out. I'm going to try to put the link on the top of the screen for you. And let's see if we have the other photo, John, which is right here. So I haven't seen this photo bottom, so I can focus on the actual image. And let's have a look at it. First impression, I think it's lovely, stunning, lots of work. I like your clouds. I like the whole scene. Well done. Talking about technical part of the photo, you have a sharpness all the way through. You have a lovely details in the sky. So exposure and everything is well done, John. Well done for that. The panorama really works. I don't know if you need the entire scene. I would maybe take away parts of it just to make it a little bit more viewable, maybe just something like this. Other than that, I think it's really cool. Even as a composition, it works. Obviously, especially if somebody's been there, this will bring lots of memories, so it's really cool and well done. When it comes to post-processing, I think you're getting a little bit of blue tint, so let's see if we can do a little bit with auto. And I don't think we need it as yellow, but we just want to get rid of some of the white. So if I would do this and push this back a little bit, I think that would help just to make it a little bit more natural. And I would push the contrast a little bit to make the difference between the white and the dark. And that's pretty much it. John, is a lovely, stunning photo. I hope to see more of your photos in the future. As I say already, the picture right here I reviewed last week, so make sure you check it out. And here are my comments for this one, John. So take care, and I hope to see more of your pictures in the future. Moving on to the next photographer, we have a Laurie Griezmann. Laurie, 2 pictures I got from you. I got them from Pauline from the Facebook group, so let's have a look at them. So talking about sunset, I assume, with the mountains at the back. Beautiful, beautiful capture. And then we're talking about these lovely rocks in the front and the sky at the back. Laurie, let's talk about it. Technically, this one with the silhouette works very, very well. I think it's really cool. Obviously, your main subject is your sky. You have a lots of texture capture there. I think the light is right. I think technically it's well done. On this one, technically, again, let's see. I can't have information here, but I can see it's sharp all the way through. You have a lots of texture on your sky, and the exposure is well done here. So nothing I would add to that as a technical part of your image. When it comes to the composition, so on composition wise, I think this works quite well. Again, when it comes to the rule of third, you need to decide what is your main subject. Is it the sky or is it the actual rock? Now, for me, you know me already by now, when it comes to blue sky, I'm not too thrilled, although I understand that it's difficult to get out there. However, I would push it just a little bit down to get maybe something like this. Let's have a look. If we can get like a panoramic crop, which is 16 on 9, and push it like this, I think the scene gets so much more powerful. Obviously, the rock is super interesting, where the blue sky is interesting, but you always have to think about also the viewer. You will not surprise viewer with the blue sky. What you will surprise somebody with is rocks and mountains like this. So that's from me when it comes to composition. I would crop it a little bit tighter and more focus on the formation here. When it comes to here, similar thing, I just wish you had a little bit more of the silhouette of the mountain. Because again, what you want to get, and nothing wrong, I think the sky is beautiful, but just as an example, this is what you want to get, maybe not as much, but a little bit more of the bottom, because it's a composition element. It either should be there, so I would include a little bit more of it, or don't put it there at all and focus just on the sky, which would be also a great option, I think. If you would just remove completely the bottom and really just showcase your sky, it would work very well too. Now, if there would be maybe a tree or something, it would make the kit a little bit more balanced, but like this, for next time, I would just try to include a little bit more. And maybe if you have a raw file and you have more to add it on the bottom, you could do that and it would be even cooler photo. Post-processing, nothing to add here. It's well done. I really like the colors, the saturation, the drama, the way you done the silhouette on the mountain. Laurie, thank you. Well done there. Nothing to add. On this one, keep an eye on your white balance. I think it's shifting a little bit, not as yellow, but it's shifting a little bit towards the blue, which is quite normal when, let me just undo the... It's quite normal when you have that much of a blue, the camera quite often takes the rest of the image and add the blue tint, which I think is what's happening here. So if you add just a little bit of a yellow, not too much, and a little bit of the purple, that balances out quite nicely. And then, yeah, maybe a little bit of a contrast. I think, again, I know I haven't seen really black and white photo from you, but this photo would be stunning. If you ever heard about Ansel Adams, that kind of style on picture like this would look super cool. I think if you would kind of turn it to black and white and then really push the contrast and play around with it, it could create something interesting as well. But in general, let me just reset this. I really like your capture. I really like the style. You know, I'm a big fan of how you edit your photos, how you keep it natural, but still interesting. So thank you again for supplying your photos, and I hope to see more of them in the future, here or inside of our group. Moving on to the next photographer, we have a Mark Farrell. Mark, thank you so much for sending us your photos. Let's jump straight into them. Mark, one thing I think is a shame is the quality of the image. You see, when I zoom in, you lose all the details. So you see how it's blurry, you almost can't say what's on it. And then it's really tricky for me to tell you about the sharpness and about the editing. Also, the images don't have details about how they were captured. And again, that makes it really tricky for me to suggest you what you could do with your images. My first impression, it's an interesting scene with obviously the valley down here. I'm not 100% sure about the foreground element here. I think it would work even better if you would be down there and shooting just straight in using the water as a foreground element. On this one, I'm a big fan of these scenes over the bridge, but I think they work so much better when you're in the center of the image and really create nice leading line. Well, you took it from a side, which isn't a problem, but that would be my suggestion for next time. Then again, we could do a little bit more by using maybe vignetting and creating a bigger depth of field there, especially when you're shooting during the day and you losing a little bit of the contrast on your images. Talking about technical part, everything is sharp all the way through, almost to the point where it's over sharp, especially the foreground. I don't know if you ever heard about composition rule called high frequency texture, and this is what you're getting a lot in the front. Obviously, it's lots of these kind of grass and a dry grass on the fields and in front of the water and the trees. If it's too much of it, it takes lots of attention away, and I think that's a little bit of a case here. So my suggestion for next time would be, again, going to the water and trying to avoid this, as it can get a little bit overwhelming. Another thing, when it comes to this photo, the light, obviously you're shooting during the day. My suggestion is always to try to go out a little bit later during the day to get more kind of diffuse light, more golden colors, like a golden hour time or sunset or sunrise is perfect, because with the blue light like this, you get a lot of tint and you get a lot of harsh shadows. That's just a suggestion for the future. Talking about this one, technically it's sharp all the way through. It has a quite nice diffused light, so well done on there, and the exposure is done quite right, so nothing really I can add on technical point. Composition. So just remembering the rule that if certain parts of your photos don't add anything to the composition, they probably shouldn't be there and don't need to be here. And this is why I think you get a lot of this blue gradient, which doesn't really add anything to the image. So we could crop that, doing that just from here. So maybe I would go for more kind of panoramatic capture and go for something like this. Let's see if that would help us. And right away we get so much more dramatic view because we're losing the empty spaces. Here, nothing really much on the composition other than, again, I think it would work a little bit better if you would be in a center. But in overall, I think it's quite nicely done. I think that this picture works better when it comes to composition because it's simpler. There is less happening. There is the leading line, and it kind of gives the right composition impulses, where there is lots happening. You have all the grass, you have all the sky, you have this big scene, and it's just a lot happening. Post-processing, let's see if we touch the white balance. We don't want it as yellow, but remember that anytime you shoot with that much of a blue in the sky, the camera quite often gets overwhelmed and it kind of displays some blue tint in the rest of the image. It either display blue tint or green tint. And this is what's happening here. You see you have a lots of kind of green coming through all the way to the water and on everything else. So I would suggest to maybe just push a little bit the tint here to get reduce of some of it, and maybe push a little bit of the yellow. In your case also, I would bring down the saturation a little bit to make it less kind of contrasty, and this is where I would leave it. On this one, as I say, I would bring down the exposure a little bit. I would definitely use the vignette to introduce a little bit like a tunnel effect, and then maybe with the masking and by using radial gradient at the end, you could get something really interesting there. Anyway, Mark, thank you so much for sharing your photos. It's always a fun. You're doing great. Don't worry about it. Keep going out, keep shooting, keep sending us your images, and we're gonna keep moving step by step further and further. If you want, make sure you join us on our Facebook group, Clever Photographer Academy. It's there where we review your photos throughout the week. We have a photography competitions there. We have a photo question sessions, and it's a lot of fun. So we hope to see you there. Moving on next, we moving on Paul. Paul, we have 2 pictures from you. I feel like I saw some images from you last week, Paul, so let's have a look. Paul, we were reviewing this image and this image. So let's see what we have for you this week. Paul, so we have this image right here and this image right here. So let's talk about them. Paul, first impression, this one, again, it looks like they are blurry. The picture is blurry. When I really zoom in, you can see how it looks like it's not sharp. Now that can be done because of the way you actually compress your files into JPEG, or it's simply just blurry. Let's have a look at the details. You were using ISO 100, 150 millimeters, f5.6, 1/320 of a second. It's interesting because with 1/320 of a second, you shouldn't really get blur. So I wonder if you need to use maybe camera stabilizer or use a tripod for pictures like this, especially when you're 150 millimeters. It's really easy to get just a little bit of shake. Also, to remove some of the blur for scene like this, go for f-stop like something like 7, 8, 9, 11, so you get sharpness all the way through. On this one, it's an interesting scene, but there is a lots of white happening here. So obviously it's overcast, and as the building is already white, it's kind of overwhelming. I think coming to the point where your human eyes are focused first of all to the brightest and whitest parts of the image. This is where the sky gets way overwhelming and something to keep an eye on. Technically, I have to start with the fact that the picture looks blurry. Again, it looks like it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so it looks a little bit overexposed at some points. Let's have a look. If we hit the whites with the option, there is no exposure. It is not overexposed, but just keep an eye on your exposure for that, and definitely keep an eye on the actual blur throughout. You really want your photos sharp. On this one, I think technically it's quite well captured. It's sharp all the way through. The exposure is well done. Again, with these kind of white skies, make sure that you keep an eye on your sky. And you see here where I touch the white, you get the pieces where anything what is not black is actually overexposed, and you lost details there. So just something to keep an eye on. Talking about composition, it's quite interesting. I quite like this actually. It's kind of like a cut. It's really nice, sharp zoom in. And this is something what I was mentioning already last week, Paul. I think you have a really good eye for composition, but it's the setting of your camera maybe, or the technique you need to push a little bit, because when you can get picture like this, you really want it to be sharp all the way through and get the most out of it. You don't want to lose the points on things like this. On this one, I think it's just, to be honest, it's a wrong time of the day to photograph it. Even though it's a nice scene, when you get a white sky like this, the camera gets overwhelmed. This is why you get this kind of funky tint on your image, and just something to think of for the future. What I think it would work here is to turn it to black and white, and then really work with it. I think also you get these kind of elements in front which are a bit over confusing the scene. Again, we can use the geometry to make sure we have everything straight, which is helpful. And then we can crop it a little bit. So something like this, I think, will help. Like this. And suddenly we working with something. Let's see. Blacks, and just push the clarity, and there you have it. You're starting to get somewhere, maybe a little bit of vignette to make it even more interesting. And this is what I would do with this photo. So if you're going out and shooting at this time of the day, maybe the black and white would be an answer, Paul. Either way, keep an eye on your technique to make sure that your pictures are nice and sharp. And if you're going out during the day and maybe the sky isn't perfect or the light isn't perfect, look for alternative methods of how you can introduce something like this and make it a little bit more interesting. Paul, thank you very much for joining us. Send us more pictures in the future. We can't wait to see them. And finally, we're going to end up the landscape photographers with 2 images from Sue. Sue, it's always good to see you back. Thank you very much for submitting your images. So let's have a look at them. So first of all, we have this kind of lovely village scene with very interesting sky and kind of nice leading line. My first thing is, it's just a shame there are those cars, which takes lots of attention away. Also, there is something wrong here. Also, obviously, with the post-processing, it's kind of leaking through your car. I think this is like your fairy tale scene with lovely old buildings, and suddenly there is a dirty blue car in front of it with the bins. Sometimes we have to work with the composition, so just for the future, something to keep an eye on. On this one, it's an interesting kind of seascape scene, but I wonder where you're getting this really dark vignette from. I think, I don't know if it's there from Lens or if it's, if you actually wanted it to be like this. It would be interesting to know. But anyway, let's talk about it. Technically, this one, let's see if we have information. ISO 80, and you're getting so much noise. That's interesting. I think last time we talked about it, I think maybe it's your mobile phone. But yeah, you're getting lots of noise from the camera. F3.6, again, I think your f-stop should be a little bit higher if at all possible. But let's talk about it. There's an interesting light. So it's nice and diffuse. It's not too contrasty. You get lots of noise, which I think is a shame. On the other side, everything is sharp, so that works quite well here. And that's it for the technical part on this one. Technical part on this one, there is no information for the image, sadly. Again, you get lots of noise. Look, where I zoom in, everything gets really pixelated and I'm starting to lose details. So it's a bit tricky for me to tell you where we are. And the light also isn't the greatest. Everything is kind of, you see how everything is kind of grayish, same colorish. So then you start to lose contrast, you start to lose depth of field. And this is not the greatest scene on the world. I think if I would want to help to it, I would maybe try to avoid this part and try to see if you can go a little bit closer to the boats and try to really push it from there. Again, I'm just not sure about the vignette. Some parts also seem to be a little bit overexposed. Let's have a look here. If I am here in a Lightroom and I click on Alt or Option and I click on whites, you see everything was not black is actually burned out, overexposed, and it lost the data, and you have lots of it here. So that was my first impression. This is why you get all these kind of pale colors. You need to underexpose a little bit for a scene like this where you have so much light. Talking about composition, I quite like what you've done here. I think the building works. I think the church works. The sky is nice as well, but I already talked about the cars and the bin here. I also see that you must done some post-processing because you have two same cars here. Again, you kind of missing something leaked here, so I'm not sure where this is coming from. Was there more? Again, there are some lines here kind of coming on and off, so a bit more work to be done here. Here, composition, you would have to move differently, as I already talked to. Here on the side to see if you could take the boats from the side and maybe push it from there. Post-processing, I already mentioned there are some mistakes which you need to look at. This one, definitely look at the vignette and see if maybe this picture in overall wouldn't even work better as a black and white, something like this. If you would kind of get reduce of the vignetting and kind of push it maybe like this, you know, and bring down the exposure and maybe push the clarity and maybe get something like this. Again, like I was talking to Paul, when the light isn't right and when maybe the conditions aren't perfect, then we need to try and find alternative of how we can edit our photos. And the black and white is quite often the answer. So something maybe to look at in the future soon. In overall, anyway, thank you so much for sending us your photos. I always love to see them and I hope to see more of them in the future. And the same goes for all of you guys. Thank you so much for joining us this week. If you want to join us for our next photography review show, make sure you head to our website, cleverphotography.com/review, and look for the upcoming dates and the links of where you can upload your photos so we can review them just like for the rest of the photographers today. Folks, thank you so much. Take care, and until next week, keep shooting.